Okay. So a little bit of background context on what was in my mind when I started writing this presentation. So the objective, I was motivated by, in our general meetup sessions, there's always a lot of question about when did this school of thought come into the saying? Was there any time overlap? Could interaction have happened between different schools or different cultures? So I thought it would be useful to provide just a rough general outline to provide context for our other general discussions in the future. So just to outline the major philosophical movements, trends, and cultural lineage in ancient China as a reference. And so the focus is on temporal, political, and cultural context rather than the philosophical contents of the different schools themselves. So a lot of what I present probably, will not feel like it's really falls into a more conventional scope of philosophy. So what do I mean by philosophy here in my title? So I found in one of my favorite dictionaries, I kind of like the definition they put in. Love and pursuit of wisdom by intellectual means and moral self-discipline. The investigation of causes and laws underlying reality, and any system of philosophical inquiry or demonstration. So I kind of like it because it's pretty broad, but it's not so broad that it becomes sort of meaningless. I've seen, like in Merriam-Webster, it just says any intellectual activity that's not math and science, something like that. So that's kind of a little too broad. And what do I mean by Chinese? It's actually a very interesting question. We can probably have many discussions just on this question itself. Obviously, China is a very large country, roughly the land size of Europe, and with a very long history. So here, what I mean is so kind of in the beginning, about 3,000 years ago, the people in what we think of as Han Chinese today refer to themselves as Zhou, which direct translation means various Xia. So even that name itself already implied, even at that time, it was really a conglomerate of different cultures and nations of people. And at that time, initially, in the very beginning, at the founding of the Zhou dynasty, it referred to people living on the lands of the feudal rulers that are relatives of the Zhou king, and also descendants of nobilities from the two previous dynasties, the Xia dynasty and the Shang dynasty. And throughout the 800 years of Zhou dynasty's history, there was a lot of blending and assimilation with surrounding cultures. And therefore, it was continually an expanding definition of people. And after the Han dynasty, the name evolved to become Han, and we still use that today, the Han people. And throughout history, there was, through trade, warfare, intermarriage, all kinds of interactions, was constantly evolving assimilation with surrounding nations. And today in China, officially, there are more than 50 officially recognized ethnicities by the government. So in this presentation today, due to my limitations of my own knowledge, I can only cover the lineage, even with my extreme hubris. I only feel comfortable covering the lineage that trace back to these people of Zhou. But please remember that there are many other cultures and philosophical traditions of peoples on the land that we call China today. And one last kind of disclaimer is authorship attribution. You know, throughout the rest of the presentation, I'm going to mention various books. I just want to, and I will say so-and-so wrote this book. I just want to make it very clear up front that authorship of very ancient Chinese books are generally disputable. Okay, every book was probably written by more than one author, and it's not clear. There's no uniform consensus on who wrote those books. They're all still active areas of research, really. So that's because I think authorship wasn't really a thing back then. You know, when people wrote books and essays, they generally didn't put their names in their writing. And also, there's an interesting thing where ancient Chinese writers, many of them really love to attribute their writing to more ancient people that were famous instead of claiming their own credit, which I still don't really understand that the real motivation of that. But apparently with those ancient people, it was far more important to spread their ideas by attribution to famous people of antiquity rather than claiming credit for their own credit for their ideas. And so I think enough said on that. I generally follow traditional attributions, except where anomalies are pretty evident. So let's start our story. And the beginning, well, how far back do we go? So I like to go back to a place, and first I'm going to tell the story from archaeological evidence. And then I'm going to retell the beginning period from recorded Chinese legends and oral tradition. So let's go back to once upon a time in China, about 9,000 years ago. And a very important archaeological finding is the Peiligang and Jiahu cultures. And these sites showed clearly settled agricultural societies with a lot of civilizational advancements. These findings include symbols that carved into tortoise shells and bones of animals that are reminiscent of later Chinese writing. In the upper right, you see 4 of these symbols. And actually, for someone like me who read Chinese, it's very tempting to say, oh, this is the character for 4, this is the character for 8. This looks like something that portrays a person holding up some kind of a tool, and this could be the character for window or for the sun. But then again, we need to resist these temptations, because these, even if I say that, it doesn't form any kind of a meaningful sentence. So this has not been shown to be actual language, but there are symbols. There are 33 crane bone flutes. These are the oldest playable instruments found anywhere in the world. And they actually, and of course, these are very similar to Chinese instruments that are used even today. And there were also fermentation of rice, honey, and hawthorn leaves to make wine. Domestication of pigs, dogs, and possibly chicken. Cultivation of millet and rice, very major grains throughout ancient China. Residences, burial sites, pottery kilns, and assortment of instruments made of stone and earthenware, and large central structure believed to be a communal workplace. Another very interesting feature is that from what we can tell today, it was a very egalitarian society. Detailed analysis and extensive analyses of burial and residential patterns do not show any evidence of social hierarchy. And so there's literally thousands of sites that have been discovered in China and studied from the Paleolithic through the Neolithic. And I refer everyone to this excellent book by Professor Liu, and you can look up the reference for yourself. So basically everything I say in this section is learned from that book. And so the society evolved from generally through those thousands of years, from egalitarian to stratified. There are clear evidence of social hierarchy. First occurred in central China during the mid-Yang Shao period, so about 6,000 years ago. And the Yang Shao period generally had three-tier settlement hierarchy. And then later in the Longshan period, about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, also similar. But the early Tou culture was really a big transformation. And this roughly, that period corresponds to the Xia dynasty, the first dynasty in recorded Chinese history. And it had a four-tier settlement pattern. And also there was clear evidence of a state with world order, meaning many states with the peripheral states, a tributary system where peripheral states would send goods and contributions to the central ruling state. And this is actually very reminiscent of descriptions in the classic Book of Records regarding the Xia dynasty system. And also during these thousands of years, seems our warfare increased. There's evidence of, for example, appearance of walled towns in early Longshan period, and then becoming very widespread in late Longshan. So I'm going into all this because in reading Chinese philosophy in Confucianism and practically all schools of ancient Chinese philosophy, that many of which this group has touched on, there's common reference to this utopian egalitarian period in very great antiquity. And then there are followed by the sage kings when utopia was lost, and these sage kings implemented the optimal system after the loss of utopia. Then archaeological evidence showed around 4,000 years ago, around the beginning of what we would call the Xia dynasty, there was evidence for drastic climate change that threatened vast populations. Scientific evidence include, and this is the early Tou or Xia dynasty period, also the very beginning emergence of the Bronze Age, usage of bronze tools in China. There's pollen remains found that indicate warmer and more moist climate at that time. Remains of elephants, water buffaloes, and subtropical fauna found in northern and central China, which generally today is arid climate. Drastic rise in sea level. And here's a chart, again, from the same source book, charting the sea level rise through the millennia. And the Yellow River is famous for having changed course many times in history, which could have caused, which certainly can cause very drastic calamitous flooding, even in the inland regions. So this is what we know from archaeology and its interpretations. So what does our oral history tell us? Well, the recorded oral history starts from the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, legendary era. And the approximate time span is about 5,000 to 4,000 years ago. So roughly corresponding to the archaeological Longshan period. The 3 sovereigns, they're actually, when you consult different ancient books, there are different attributions of who the 3 sovereigns were. But I'll take sort of the more standard group of 3 from Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian. So these are Fuxi, who's credited with inventing music, hunting, fishing, domestication, and cooking, and originator of the concept underlying the I Ching. He's we accredited with inventing the 8 trigram symbols and the concept. There's a Nuwa, which literally Nu means woman or female, and Wa means a snail. And she saved the world, and I'll give more details on that. And Shen Nong, the deity of agriculture, that's what it means. So he taught people how to farm, and also was the originator of herbal medicine, according to legend. And the 5 emperors, I list them here. The ones that most people are familiar with are the Yellow Emperor, the Emperor Yao, and the Emperor Shun. So the legend of Nuwa, and this is according to one source book written in the Zhou dynasty, relates Nuwa to the time when heaven and earth were in disruption. So would someone volunteer to read this passage below?
I will.
Thank you, Madeline.
Okay, surprised myself there. The legend of Nuwa. The Huainanzi relates Nuwa to the time when heaven and earth were in disruption. Going back to more ancient times, the 4 pillars were broken. The 9 provinces were in tatters. Heaven did not completely cover the earth. Earth did not hold up heaven all the way around its circumference. Fires blazed out of control and could not be extinguished. Water flooded in great expanses and would not recede. Ferocious animals ate blameless people. Predatory birds snatched the elderly and the weak. Thereupon, Nuwa smelted together 5 colored stones in order to patch up the azure sky, cut off the legs of the great turtle to set them up as the 4 pillars, killed the black dragon to provide relief for Ji province, and piled up reeds and cinders to stop the surging waters. The azure sky was patched, the 4 pillars were set up, the surging waters were drained, the province of Ji was tranquil, crafty vermin died off, blameless people preserved their lives.
Thank you very much, Madeline, for the beautiful reading. So this is one of my favorite ancient Chinese legends. Somehow I just find it very moving, and it seems to reflect the great sufferings and calamities that had happened in ancient times. So in the lower right is a old wood block printing illustration of Nuwa mending the heaven.
I have a question about this one.
Yeah.
Um, in a previous meetup when we discussed the uh, the coming of Buddhism to China,
Mhm.
one of the topics was that there was a bodhisattva of compassion in India who had gradually somehow in China become female and
Mhm.
had become Kuan Yin. And I'm
Yes.
wondering if this could be kind of the indigenous origin of that.
That's a very interesting thought. I have never, I have not, I'm not aware of that proposition or a study into that, but I think that's a very, very interesting thought. Yeah, thank you. So there's also the legend of Hou Yi, and he was a ruler with exceptional archery skills. And he, with his archery, he supposedly had accomplished some really tremendous feats. He saved the moon during eclipse. He rescued the China from a variety of plagues, one of which involved a wind monster who was wreaking havoc across the land. Perhaps one of his most famous stories was there was a period of time when there were 10 suns, and it was so hot that it was burning up the earth, and people were dying. So he used his archery skills to shoot down 9 out of the 10 suns. And also his wife is a very famous lunar deity,
King,
Tang Tang.
questions while
Yeah,
you're
yes, please.
my question is the Silk Road and Buddhism, Indian philosophy. Did Indian philosophy come with Buddhism to China? And what role did the Silk Road and then ideas from the other lands play in this Chinese philosophy?
Yes, excellent question. So this is first question. Yes, Indian philosophy and Buddhism did come in initially through the Silk Road, but that is a few thousand years later. So these legends are not likely to the Indian philosophy probably did not shape these legends, although we are not certain because there is some rather ancient sites in China that have goods that came from India. So there was very, very ancient trade between India and China. But as far as we know, there isn't a connection. And then another legend, important legend, is the legend of the Yellow Emperor. There are many legends. I'm just kind of pick and choosing a few here to give a flavor. So that's the Yellow Emperor. He is believed to be the common ancestor of all Han Chinese. And he defeated a major opponent. It's either Chiyu or Yandi, or perhaps Chiyu and Yandi were the same person, to form the first Chinese state. He's also credited with many inventions like carts, boats, clothing, calendar, musical scales, and some musical instruments, for example. He's also credited with charging Cangjie, one of his ministers, to invent writing. And his wife, Empress Leizu, also very important figure. She believed to have invented silk. So when we were talking about the archaeological interpretations, we talked about the great calamities and floods. So there was also a great period of calamitous floods in the Chinese legends. And also the chronology falls roughly with the archaeological chronology. And so the oral history was, there were a lot of floods and the climate was very, very excessive precipitations for 9 out of 10 years. Actually, this is this statement is in one of our readings, the autumn water chapter in Zhuangzi that we read a month ago. So Emperor Yao at that time appointed one of his ministers named Gun to lead many tribes in central China to stop the Yellow River's flooding. Gun led people and spent 9 years of building dams everywhere. And that actually only made the flooding even worse. So Yao held him responsible and gave him a life sentence, but appointed Gun's son, Yu, to take over that work. So Yu also led the alliance of tribes, and his approach was totally different. Instead of building dams, he led people to build canals all over the place to channel the water and increase the flow of water into the ocean. And that was successful. After 13 years of tireless dedication, the floods were tamed. So Yu became a very popular leader and later founded the Xia dynasty. And as many of you know, the concept of mandate of heaven became important in Zhou dynasty. And the people who formulated this theory would often cite Yu as a ancient example of someone who did great work, served the people, gained popularity, and acquired the mandate of heaven, and founded his own dynasty.
Excuse me, this is Sarah.
Yes.
I don't know if you guys can hear me. What was his role, the most recent character you were just talking about? What was his title, I guess, / role?
Yu the Great, he was also the first emperor of the Xia dynasty. And before he became an emperor, he controlled the great floods. He led multiple tribes and worked to build canals and channels to control the flooding in China. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. That's fascinating. Okay, sorry, I just needed to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So some summary of thought as we close out on the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors period. Seems to me there are profound imprints of natural calamities in the Chinese collective memory and culture. And this resulted in a very, very early in the respect for heaven and nature, which is manifest in both Taoism and Confucianism later on. And in fact, throughout Chinese history, even in Chinese culture today. And the perennial great floods of the 3,400-mile long Yellow River very early on united diverse peoples in Chinese heartland and formed the Chinese belief that China must be united. And this is a very persistent and firm belief. And I believe it's must be an essential element in the long political and recorded history of China. And the legends also tell a story of technological innovations transforming society in very ancient times. So now we depart the Neolithic times, and we go into a fully blossomed Bronze Age, which is the Shang, and this time is this time of the Shang dynasty, which followed the Xia dynasty. And as I said, this is a mature Bronze Age in China. And this is the earliest dynasty where the historical accounts are unquestionable because they're firmly corroborated by massive amounts of archaeological evidence. This is also where we find earliest surviving artifacts of Chinese writing. And in the lower right corner here shows an oracle bone with inscriptions of Chinese characters on there.
Let me ask a question. Is there evidence of bronze in the Shang dynasty? Because that would seem to indicate, at least at that time, or the early Shang, that there was some communication and trade with the outside world, because it's way before India, that the Bronze Age existed throughout at least Europe and China. So could you say, was there any evidence of the Shah having bronze, even if in a lower, less artistic level?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
Yes, and it's an evolution starting from rare, very simple instrumentations and gradually becoming more and more widespread and more sophisticated. So yeah, Shang Dynasty is really where it reached great heights. You see these artworks, right, from Shang Dynasty, and they're just, I mean, there's so many and they're fascinating. The designs are really fascinating. Too bad this picture is not really good. I didn't have time to scan my better picture. This is, in the center here is a child hugging this this figure. I don't know. When I see these things, I find it very moving. There's some philosophy and deep thought embedded in these designs, except I don't know what they are, but there's something in there. And right, so go ahead.
I had a question. This is Ty. Before you move on from the fourth point or bullet point regarding the Shi being, taken down by the Shang, in a previous slide you had the Shia listed as a mandate of heaven, and I'm particularly interested in that because of its parallelism to manifest destiny. So my question is, like, what is the mandate from heaven? Is it like a thing led by these because previously it was parenthetically noted as part of the Shia, now it's parenthetically noted as part of the Shang. So can you kind of explain that? Like, why is it listed parenthetically under both the Shia and the Shang, or is there a separate term for mandate of heaven? And if so, can you please expound upon that? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a complicated topic, so I'll give you my personal oversimplified explanation and take it as that. It's in ancient times, obviously there wasn't democracy, but there was still a necessity for regime change when rulers get so bad. So it was a justification for overthrow, for rebellion, and for uprisings. So the theory was that when a ruler's authority was blessed by heaven, basically. But how do you know if the ruler is blessed by heaven or not? It's manifest in how much support in the populace the ruler has. And when the ruler is really bad, the heaven will cause people to uprise and overthrow and establish a new regime.
I'm sorry to interrupt. So my question would be, which political theory are you referring to with that? What's the title of that philosophy?
The mandate of heaven, this doctrine. And I'll talk more about that later. Actually, it's a concept that evolved also. But that's a simple explanation of ancient philosophers justifying when people justifying that sometimes people have the right to rise up and overthrow a government.
Ping, I have a question.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes.
I've heard that Japan and Korea were populated by ancient Chinese, the Central Asia, how much of it was influenced by the Chinese? And was there influence of this time? Were they ancient Chinese who moved to that area? Was it part of ancient China or Chinese dynasty?
So you're asking, okay, so you're not asking about influence on Japan and Korea, but you're asking about Central
No,
Asia.
that's what I've heard, that Japan and Korea were populated by the Chinese, ancient Chinese, right? I don't know if it's true, but that's what I've heard. And
Yes, quick answer is yes, but it's more complex than that. It's clear from both histories, indigenous histories in Japan and Korea, and also from scientific genetic research, that there are many contributors to the peoples of modern Japan and Korea, and influx of people from today's mainland China is certainly an important component of that, both genetically and culturally.
And so my question then was it the same with Central Asia? Because it's so, China and Central Asia are right next to each other. And were they part of any of these dynasties?
I will, stay tuned. I will talk about that in the Han Dynasty a little bit later. So thank you for the question, but stay tuned. So the founder of the Shang Dynasty is another example of mandate of heaven. The very last emperor of Xia was known to be a very horrible despot. So Tang was one of the feudalistic lords, and he was popular. So he led an army and people to overthrow the Xia Dynasty and establish the Shang Dynasty. And my meager knowledge of this philosophy and culture in the Shang Dynasty, one prominent feature often stated is that they really revered deities and spirits of the deceased. And it seems like one interpretation, there was also a lot of massive human sacrifices in tombs. So this might reflect that their attitude toward death was very different, that there was a celebration of life after death rather than fear of death. But that's an interpretation. So now we get into a very exciting, maybe the most exciting area of Chinese philosophy. The Zhou dynasty, which follows the Shang. So the Shang is almost kind of a repeat of the Xia dynasty. The very last Shang emperor was also known to be a very cruel despot. So one of the feudal leader in the West, in the Western region of China at that time, was later became King Wen. He was actually jailed, unfairly jailed by the last ruler of Shang. And while he was in prison, as legend had, he wrote the I Ching, which is the primeval book of Chinese metaphysics and all schools of philosophy. And the familiar concepts of yin yang, the 8 trigrams, the 64 hexagrams, and their interpretations are all contained in this book. He actually did not overthrow the Shang dynasty. It was his son, King Wu, which was a military leader who accomplished that. And posthumously, he's honored. Wen was honored as the posthumous founder. And so this is kind of the period also of the last sage kings revered by later schools of thought. So King Wen, King Wu, and also Zhou Gong, who was a regent and de facto ruler of China, because the king at that time was very young. So Zhou Gong really ran the show. And Confucianists believe he constructed the optimal post-utopian political system. And also during this period was when this doctrine, mandate of heaven, was invented to justify the legitimacy of the Zhou dynasty. So that was Western Zhou. And then we transitioned to a later period called the Eastern Zhou, which has two sub-periods. First one is called the Spring and Autumn period. And the political landscape then was the central state Zhou became increasingly powerless. And the feudalistic states that were supposed to be subservient to the central state became far more powerful. Many of them became far more powerful than the central Zhou state. But the Zhou rulers still possessed a kind of a moral, quasi-religious authority. In a way, it's kind of like maybe like the Pope in Byzantine Europe. And increased scale of warfare involving tens of thousands of people on each side became more common. And larger states grew larger by swallowing up and attacking and swallowing up weaker, smaller states. In the beginning of the spring and autumn period, there were far more than 100, probably approaching 200 states. And this, by the end, through about 300 years of consolidation, it went down to about 20 states. And during all this fighting and war and the interstate order was partly maintained by 5 successive hegemons. These were rulers of the powerful states. They did so, they claimed legitimacy by saying that what they were doing in ordering the other states around and telling them what to do, that they were doing it to serve the interests of the Zhou king, or rather than the interest, they were holding up the authority of the Zhou king. So they
Some
were,
would say that's applicable to, you know, even a current situation in a sense. That would be some people's opinion on that. But I just wanted to add that in. That sounds good. Sorry about that. Continue.
yeah, thank you. Yes, I believe this is a
I feel like
perennial.
sorry to interrupt you again. I feel like it would just be much easier in person. Do you guys hold these meetings in person ever, or is it usually always Zoom? And understandable if it's just been Zoom since the pandemic. But I feel like we would have a more fluid, I'm interested in kind of talking about some of the topics that you bring up. So I think in person, it's just easier to start that conversation. So I apologize if it sounds like I'm barging in, but it's kind of just, I wish we could just like exchange our thoughts as they're happening.
Yes.
So yeah, do you guys hold in-person meetings or?
No, we don't. And I do agree with what you're saying about in person. But then again, the advantage of Zoom is we literally have people all across the country.
Oh, that's right. Okay,
East and West Coast. So that's an advantage as on the flip side. Yeah. So right. So they use the propaganda that they were serving the Zhou king to legitimize their power and maintaining a world order.
So in the early Zhou, well, throughout the Zhou period, the early period, the kingdoms were actually more like the Greek city-states. It was small, and then it got some except with a central government. And then they would consolidate on the larger states. Is that right? At the early period, it was more like city-states.
Yeah, early period, very early, there were many states. Yeah, and each state was probably the size of a couple of towns, a couple of cities. And the way it was, the Zhou's king was his state was in the center, and the proximal states were his direct relatives, his brothers, people. And then the little more distant states were nobilities of the previous dynasties. And then the very far states were peoples of states of other nationalities. And these other nationalities later, as I said, became more and more assimilated. Like Qin, which finally united China, was, in the beginning considered a foreign culture, but then, yeah. Go ahead.
I have a question. This is Elena. So we wouldn't go too far from the period. So you were mentioning utopia, and then also post-utopian, forming post and shaping post-utopian political system. So why is it this period called utopia? Is there any particular characteristics of that period?
Thank you for asking. That's sort of my insertion. So this is not some kind of agreed terminology. And I kind of did that because a few months ago, I gave a presentation on the Confucianist vision of utopia. And I believe it was referring to this very ancient early Neolithic time when society was naturally harmonious and more egalitarian. But that's really my own, I sorry, sometimes I'm not clear about what's my own assertions and what's more common knowledge.
Just to address the topic of utopia, the ideal society, the person who coined the word in English, it was a pun, or not a pun, but it had dual meaning. Because utopia means place, and you can either mean good place, or it can mean no place. In other words, this good place does not exist.
Right. We're not sure in this case if it exists or not. So this is all, either legends told by philosophers or, in kind of outreaching interpretations based on archaeology. Okay, so anyway, moving on. The spring and autumn period. So I gave this for the political landscape. So now let's talk about philosophy. This was a very important period where the founders of major philosophical schools in China appeared. The oldest one, I would say kind of the grandfather of Chinese philosophy, was Lao Tzu. He lived circa 2,600 years ago. And probably he doesn't need much introduction. He was later revered as the founder of Taoism, author of the Tao Te Ching. And roughly contemporaneous, a couple of decades later than Lao Tzu, was Confucius. And he also probably doesn't need much introduction. Had 300 students or 3,000 students or followers. He traveled around the Zhou Empire to profess his teachings of personal virtues and moral governance, hoping for adoption by feudalistic rulers, but largely not successful during his lifetime. And Confucius was very likely Lao Tzu's student, apprentice in learning funeral rites. And later in this period was the appearance of Sun Tzu, whose work we just studied last week, a military philosopher. And the second sub-period of Eastern Zhou was the Warring States period. This was really where ancient Chinese philosophy came into full bloom. And further consolidation so that China wound up with 7 powerful states and a few very weak states that were just struggling, hanging on by a thread for their own survivals. On the right is a map of China at that time. And at that time, military campaigns on the scale of hundreds of thousands of soldiers on each side became common. The rulers were preoccupied with building up their military strength both for self-preservation and for conquer. And Qing basically brought all the other states to their knees and unified China into the Qing dynasty.
Could I ask something about the introduction of philosophy that sounds interesting? It seems like the praxis, such as the I Ching, in other words, the technique for predictions came before the philosophy. The technique came before the ideas. That seems an interesting development because it's not the other way downward, but in a sense, a technique that in a sense manifested into a greater system of understanding. So could you, you might say something about that or not?
I will.
For a second, Tom, are you okay? Tom, are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay, you seem to be, I don't know if you're dozing off or you feel sick.
No, no. I mean, I'm just listening.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Sorry, Phil. Go ahead.
Why? What did we miss with him? You guys can see his video?
No, he just seemed like he was, I don't know if he was dozing off or he just seemed like falling back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, thank
He's
you.
okay.
Yeah, he's okay. So thank you for the wellness check. That's good. We should all look out for each other. And
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
in answering your question, I guess I will answer it. I'm taking the legends at face value. So the quick answer is no. Because if you go all the way back to Fuxi, the story was that he was very keen in observing nature, and he wanted to observing nature to find rhythms and patterns of nature, and that's how he came up and he came up with the 8 trigrams. He thought those 8 trigrams summarize his understanding of how nature worked. So in that sense, the thinking came before the divination, and supposedly the divination developed later. But this is all legends, that's all oral tradition. So let's take it as that. Okay, so this is the political landscape, a lot of fighting basically during the Warring States. But this actually all the fighting and really stimulated the rulers to find talents, and society became more egalitarian. Rulers were dissatisfied with employing just these nobilities to serve them. They really wanted to tap from all levels of society to find real talents, people with new ideas to make their state uniquely strong. So so it's kind of an irony. This turmoil and warfare actually led to the full blossoming of intellectual thoughts. So originally, kind of a clarification, we talk about all these different schools and give them names. Most of these labels were applied later. So if you look at the original text from the Zhou dynasty, there were only 2 schools with labels, Confucianism and Moism. Other labels such as Taoism, legalism, schools of names are all ad hoc from Han Dynasty about a couple of hundred years later. And also this period that we often call it the contention of 100 schools of thought, basically 100 schools of thought contending to be heard. But I just want to clarify, 100 is not literal, okay? It's a common Chinese expression meaning many, many. So it's not literally 100. Today, we're aware that there were about a dozen schools that we still know something about. And if you're interested, a recommended reading is the Tianxia, All Under Heaven chapter in Zhuangzi. which gives a very great summary of different schools of thought during the Zhou dynasty, and possibly written by the great philosopher at that time, Zhuangzi. So there was, obviously this period, there's way too much really for me to cover. So I'll just mention a few of the most influential philosophers. As I said, Moism was one of the two major schools at that time. Although today, it doesn't have a lot of influence that we're aware of. It was founded by Mozi. He really was a very interesting figure, a polymath. This school of thought was an antagonist against Confucianism. Mozi himself was a very accomplished scientist and inventor. He wrote down a statement that's very similar to Newton's first law of motion. Of course, thousands of years before Newton. He also wrote down the earliest explanation of optical principles underlying a camera, or specifically the pinhole camera. He had a lot of followers in China, probably tens of thousands, organized into units across China. And they were very active. And their objective was to serve society, and they were very anti-war. The basic tenets include equal love of all humans, extreme frugality of the self. Don't buy new clothes until they're completely tattered, and things like that. Eat very little, and devote your entire life, every waking hour, to working for betterment of society. So this is where they become antagonists with Confucianism.
This must be like the very start of this, right? Around these five. I would say one of these. Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to confirm.
So they are very vehemently opposed to the Confucianist society that you start with self-love, and then you're naturally born with love for your family, your parents, and your siblings, and you extend that love layer by layer until you finally maybe reach all humankind. And also you should treat your family nicely, and when they die, you should carry on the proper rites and ceremonies and offerings to the deceased. The Mohists attack that philosophy. They say, no, you should start right from the start, love everyone equally. And also you should be very parsimonious in burial rites. Just, use the smallest amount of material. Don't offer offering. They're against offerings and all these ceremonial rites. It was just against their belief. It was a waste, and it was phony, as they professed. And they respected spirits, deities, and they believed in spirits in the afterlife. But this school was very prominent, very popular, obviously, but did not last very long. And of course, other prominent figures, Mencius and Xunzi, major Confucianist philosophers, with opposing views of human nature, whether it was humans were born with good nature or bad nature.
I mean, this also is just fascinating because I did major in philosophy in college. So I think that there's a lot of themes that can be applied to generations of philosophies going forward. And it's interesting because I remember reading specifically about some of these principles in, my philosophy courses with and how many years after all of these thoughts came into being, did Thomas Hobbes come along? I don't know if you guys are familiar with philosophy beyond a certain genre, but I think it's just fascinating that there's overlapping themes throughout philosophies as generations unfold.
Well, that's great. That's great. That's part of the purpose of this meetup group is to promote that mutual understanding of different philosophies of different parts of the world. So I'm glad you're getting that out of it. Great. So
Pin, could I ask you before we went any further? So there
Okay.
is thank you. There is Newton's first law. It's the law of inertia and gravity and such resistance. So why do you think it's related to this particular time period and Moism? What does it have to do with it?
okay, so Newton's first law basically says that an object at rest will stay at rest, and unless external forces apply to it, and also an object that's traveling will travel at the same speed, unless it's affected by an external force. So basically, Mozi had written a statement stating that. So no, right. So this the statement itself does not relate to gravity, right? Okay, so moving on, Zhuangzi, we're probably familiar with, major Taoist philosopher, focus on individual spiritual liberation instead of politics, which really distinguishes him from most other Chinese philosophers. And in the legalist school, perhaps the earliest legalist was Shang. He was author of the oldest legalist philosophy book, the Book of the Lord Shang. He was also the prime minister of Qin, applied his philosophies in reforming the Qin political system, and played really a key and seminal role in the rise of power of Qin. And Han Feizi, whom we've also studied in this meetup, was a major legalist philosopher. He was the last of the great Zhou dynasty philosophers, so he really synthesized a lot of different schools of thought, including Taoism, and he himself was Xunzi's student. So in that sense, he also carried the Confucianist lineage. So one institution worth mentioning in the later part of the Warring States period was the Jixia Academy. It was one of the world's earliest state-sponsored institutions of intellectual learning. It was established by the king of Qi around 2,300 years ago. And Qi, just go back to this map. Qi is a coastal state on the eastern coast of China. It was a very wealthy area. And also it was the farthest state from the mighty Qin. So for quite a long time, they were more shielded from the military threat of Qin. So had more luxury, the money and the luxury to support a great intellectual institution. And they invited prominent scholars from all over China and all different schools of thought. And these scholars were bestowed government titles and afforded government residences, and all their livelihood supported. There were more than 1,000 scholars at the time, including Mencius, Xunzi, and other very prominent scholars. And they spent their time conducting regular debates, wrote books, and lectured. And Xunzi was especially prominent, served as the chair of this institution at one time.
Pin, I have a question.
Yes.
Do these philosophers still have influence actually two parts to my question. In modern day Chinese life, and number two, when the communists came, did they try to eradicate these philosophers? Because I know they did. They tried to redactate, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
religion
yeah.
and other beliefs.
Yes, great questions. Yes, these schools of thought still have, throughout Chinese history, including today, have a very lasting influence in shaping our way of thinking, how we react to things. And the Chinese communists conducted massive destruction of traditional Chinese culture. The school that suffered the most was Confucianism. Because Confucianism was the most powerful, of course, then it became enemy number one. Chairman Mao himself probably had a personal liking for the legalist school. Well, it's a complicated topic. I think the attack on traditional culture was widespread and more or less across the board. But of course, the enemy number one during the Cultural Revolution was especially Confucianism. That's all I can say in a couple of sentences. So this academy and also surviving texts, if you compare the text from the Warring States period against books from the Spring Autumn period, you certainly see the evolution of much more explanation of principles and much tighter logical reasoning. And so it really, I think it's a reflection of the prevalence of free intellectual debate in the Warring States period. And so at this point, congratulations. In my opinion, we've really gone through the most exciting periods of Chinese philosophy.
Does anyone else wish that we could have maybe another one focused a little bit more in, a little bit more in depth or in detail about some of this? Maybe like a second one on this topic? Maybe if you want to hold off for a little bit, let this information sink in and then meet back up if we have any questions or like want to follow up on anything.
Yeah, Sarah, if you look on the Meetup website for this group, you will find the past discussion topics. They're recorded. And so there have been ones on specific topics or philosophers that he's discussing today that we've already gone through.
Oh, perfect.
And this one is
Okay.
this one is the overview one to help us kind of get a context of where they appeared in history and what their relationship to each other was like.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for the clarification. I'll take a look on the site and then take it from there. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Madeline, and thank you, Sarah. I agree with the suggestion. It would be nice to, in the future, maybe just focus on one period and really go in depth. So anyway, I'll take that suggestion. Thank you. So I'm gonna give us increasingly sketchy descriptions later on because of my personal preference. I've been mainly personally interested in the antiquity, and later periods I don't have as much knowledge, and also this volunteer time I started running out of time as well in preparing the slides. So Qing dynasty was very short, only lasted 15 years. And it's interesting, nonetheless, it's state-sponsored legalism. It really adopted and implemented the legalist philosophy in its governance. And one of the high priorities of the Qing dynasty was creating a uniform China. This is way beyond unifying China. This is a uniform China. it unified the writing system. Before, each separate state had its own variant of Chinese characters. And here I show an example. This is the character for mother. At the top is what the form that we use today. And on the upper right, this is from the oracle bones from the Shang dynasty, so roughly 3,500 years ago. And then this is the one below. So this is a pictograph, if you will, of a woman kneeling, prominently featuring her breasts as a symbol of motherhood. And this is a later form from the bronze inscriptions in the bronzeware, probably from about 3,000 years ago in the early Zhou dynasty. And this is also from the Zhou dynasty, the third one down, but this is a local variant used by the state of Qing. And then the fourth one is the script by the Qing dynasty, the unified script. And then all the the one below that, the bottom of the right-hand column, is the script evolved later into the Han dynasty script. And then all the ones on the left column are forms that still are in use today.
Pin, are you able to read the ancient form, or do you have to learn it? Someone who knows
Ancient form, I can read up to the Han dynasty. Those characters are basically more or less the same as what we use today.
and
But
which one is the Han dynasty?
this is the bottom one of the right-hand corner. But all the other ones, the first four, no, an average Chinese generally not able. You know, sometimes we can guess a couple of them. Well, a small number, more than a couple, you know, a small number of them, but in general, we cannot read them, which is really too bad because these characters were more hieroglyphic and very artistic.
And the second column is the different dialect. They're written in different.
They're not different dialects, but they're more like cursive versus print.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay.
Yeah, right after the Qing dynasty, the Chinese writing is uniform across. There's only spoken dialects, but there's no written language dialects. Yeah. So they also uniformed, the Qing Empire uniform widths of carriage tracks. Used to be different states had different widths of tracks. So traveling from one state to another was complicated. Uniform currency, measurement systems, etc. And eliminated feudalistic states and established a country, a uniform system of counties and prefectures across China. The first emperor, at the advice of his prime minister, who was also a very well-known legalist philosopher, ordered all privately owned books burnt because the legalist belief was intellectual thinking leads to disobedience, and that was bad. Was hampers state authority. The only books that were not burned were utilitarian books of astrology, divination, agriculture, medicine, and the history of Qing. But there was also a complete set of books kept at the central library. But later, very unfortunately, during the uprising of overthrowing the Qing Empire, a prominent rebel leader, the hegemon king Shang, set the capital city on fire for 3 months and destroying the government book collection as well. So that was a very disastrous event in Chinese culture and history. Also, the first emperor of Qin buried more than 460 scholars alive.
Who was they rebelling against? I mean, what was the reason for the rebellion? I mean, clearly there was a reason. But I mean,
People had enough of the Qin totalitarianism
Yeah.
and heavy taxes, but the most immediate cause was Qin in basically every single person was owned by the state and had to perform duties of the state in building the Great Wall, in joining the military, and not only join, they had to supply their own food, their own methods of transportation to support themselves in the military and in the labor. And basically the uprising was triggered by 2 soldiers that were inscripted into the army. And during their travel to report to the army, I think they made a mistake and they were afraid of the punishment. So they decided to rebel. And that was like a spark that just lit the fires all across China.
I just wanted to throw in something semi-relevant, which is that in ancient Peru, you know how they have that system of roads there? The idea was that if you were a citizen of Peru, I forget, it was every year or every few years, you had work duty. You would go off in the service of the government and you would spend a month working on the road building or the wall building or whatever was going on.
Wow.
Which was what enabled, and the government did provide for you while you were doing it. So you weren't required to bring all your own stuff. It actually helped establish them as an empire because you'd be working with people from all over the place within the empire during your month of work duty. You would speak, it helped develop a common language and a common culture. And it also helped develop the system of kind of quasi-observatories, but like sightline points in Peru that were helpful for navigating.
Yeah, thank you for relating that. I should also say this kind of conscription system was maintained throughout ancient China in much milder forms than the Qin dynasty. People actually received benefits and compensations for their work. So kind of similar to what you describe of Peru.
They still do it in Rwanda now. One day, I think it's one day a week or one day a month, the whole community has to get together and clean up. And Rwanda, I'm sure all of you've heard of the Rwandan, the killings there, is one of the cleanest countries in the world because of that.
Pin, I have a question for you. This is Jenny. Why 460 scholars? Why were they buried alive? I mean, their ideology was different from the dynasties ideology? Why?
I think the intent was try to kill all scholars, all intellectuals that could have fancy ideas that make people dissatisfied, discontent with authoritarian rule. But I guess they only managed to round up 460.
Thank you.
And so now so as I said, Qin dynasty only lasted 15 years, very short amount of time. And now we transition to the Han dynasty. We already talked a little bit about the origin, the uprisings. So the political landscape, after Qin's totalitarian rule, bloody uprisings and centuries of constant warfare, the early Han empires favored Taoism for a laissez-faire approach of governance to let people rest and focus on their livelihoods. And the founding emperor of Zhou. He was a military general who came from fairly uneducated and humble beginnings. He initially had great disdain for Confucianist scholars. He thought there were a bunch of pretentious phonies. And famously, while he was drunk, urinated in their hats. But he later appreciated when he actually became a ruler, had to govern, and there was always very disorder in.
Is it possible
when,
that you can let people in?
Oh, sorry. Thank you for reminding me. Let me
Hello?
see. Yeah, thank you. I'm not paying attention to the participants, so I'm omitting everyone right now. Thank you.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you
like-
for recognizing that.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not a good multitasker at all.
Can I ask a question real quick? Famously urinated in their hats. Is that to suggest that most scholars were beggars, that like hat in hand kind of deal?
No, the Confucianists wore it was really kind of a crown, a special hat. I wish I had a picture. That was part of their proper attire. So to humiliate them or make fun of them, he ordered them to take their hats off and then he urinated in them. No, they were not begging. They were dressed rather fancy. And I guess the emperor thought it was pretentious. But later when he actually became an emperor, there was also the other generals and ministers were all his old buddies. So they just all talked over each other. They would literally have physical fights in the court. So the Confucianists established proper rights and order. So later on, he did start to appreciate them when he had to govern. So using the Taoism-inspired approach, the later emperors, the successors of Gaozu, the Wen and Jing emperors, implemented 4 decades of overall really good governance to build up national wealth. And this period of rest and economic growth enabled the later Han dynasty's expansionism. So after Wen and Jing was Emperor Wu, and this was really a big pivoting point, turning point in Han dynasty. And so this is roughly about 100 years BC, just for reference. He adopted Confucianism as state-sponsored school of thought because Confucianism had the advantage of making it easier, teaching people obedience to authority. So it made rulers easier to govern people. And he pivoted to an expansionist approach. And a major motivation was the constant raids from the Xiongnu tribes and military threat. The Xiongnu were nomadic nations from the Central Eurasian steppes. So this is, when I asked someone to stay tuned about Central Asia, this is what I was anticipating that I would talk about. And part of this, the strategy was to form an alliance with the nations in the Western region, Xiyu, which is modern day Xinjiang and roughly Afghanistan areas. This was, the language at that time was a strategy of cutting off the Xiongnu's right arm. And this, the military and diplomatic explorations and expeditions into the Western region led to the initiation of the Silk Road. And this, the Silk Road also led to drastically increase cultural exchanges and inflow with, for example, the Persian Empire and with India. And it's the beginning of the inflow of introduction of Buddhism into China. And here is a map of the expansions in the Han Dynasty. I won't say much about it. This is just so you know it's here in case afterward you want to go online and study this map. So what was going on in Han Dynasty as far as philosophy? Well, a lot was going on, so I can only cover a few things. Sorry, I see people raising hands, so why don't you just go ahead and jump in if you have a question or a comment.
So
go ahead.
So just want to I wanted to do this and maybe at the end, but why don't I just tell you guys right now? I'm the organizer of Philosophers and Gamblers, and this event called Asian Philosophy is an event in my meetup group. If you're interested in my other events, we have an event on Monday, which is a seminar event, which 2 or 3 professors come together and talk about philosophy papers. And then we have a Thursday event that is more casual in nature. So if you're interested in joining those events, please join, Philosophers and Gamblers, which this event, Asian Philosophy, is part of.
Would you mind, sorry, can you send me the link for that? This is
Sure.
Sarah. I actually posted on today's meeting, so you'll see my name. If you could send me a link to yours, that would be wonderful.
I will post it on the chat. I will post
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem. The second thing I want to go over is that we do have a Discord group. And in the Discord group, I think, Jason posted the link to the Discord in almost every event page, wherever you are from. So just click on the Discord group. And the value added for the Discord group is that you can, let's say you miss an event for Asian philosophy, you can always go to that channel. You can go to Discord and go to recordings, and you can find all the recordings. And also upcoming events in Asian philosophy, you can find that as well. And reading material, they are all stacked in all the channels on Discord. And it is also a great meeting place to talk with other people that you don't get to when you're in the meeting, right? So I'm gonna post the link of the meetup group and the Discord join link so that everyone can join. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil, for the plug. Any other questions from, I think someone else raised the hand.
Yeah, Jin, I have a question. I'm not sure if you're going to cover this later, but you were talking about Mo Tzu earlier, and I was wondering if you were going to talk about Emperor Wang Mang and maybe his relationship to the thought of Moism, or are you going to come to that, or is now a good time for me to ask about that?
No, I'm not going to come to that. Yeah, basically I started running out of time. So yeah, what's your question? I actually won't be able to answer it. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm curious about Emperor Wang Mang and the influence of Moism upon him. I've read the Wikipedia article on Wang Mang, and there's no mention of Moism, but his ideas seem pretty similar to Moistic ideas and similar to like Marxist ideas in general. And so I was wondering if Moism had an influence on Wang Mang. And I was also interested in the relationship between Moism and Chinese Marxism as well, if you have anything to say.
Yeah, I would say it's kind of impossible to answer that. I do believe Moism has lasting influence, but it's more like salt in the sea. It's not something we can easily identify anymore because no one really says, well, I'm a follower of Moism. But I do believe, considering how popular Moism was and how important during that important Zhou dynasty period, a lot of the beliefs and thinking and views of life must exist today, but it's in a dissolved form. And Marxists do not, at least explicitly to my awareness, talk about Mozi. So there's no tangible connection there. That's my understanding. Of course, I don't know everything. So, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so Han Dynasty. So just a few highlights. After the book burning, scholars reconstructed texts from memory. So there was a massive exercise of that. In addition, they edited, recompiled texts, and wrote interpretive annotations. These works are extremely influential. Basically, a lot of, you look at the annotations, in the sheer number of characters, it normally far outweighs the original text. So our understanding of more ancient texts, a lot of it is really through the lens of these scholars. So it was a very important movement. It was also in previous meetups, many people asked about the 5 elements Wu Xing concept. This was also the period when this concept came into full development, even though it began a couple of hundred years earlier. And this was also a period of many, many influential scholars, philosophers, and several polymaths. I just talk about one prominent person, Dong Zhongshu. He formulated the doctrine of interactions between heaven and mankind, which is extremely influential throughout Chinese history. And again, I'm oversimplifying things based on my own meager understanding. So part of this doctrine is natural disasters. So basically, you can see it as an elaboration or extension of the mandate of heaven theory. And how do you know it mandate of heaven? How does it manifest? Well, it manifests in natural disasters and anomalies, astronomical anomalies and disasters, such as earthquakes, droughts, floods. Basically, when those things happen, that means heaven is angry at the ruler because the ruler is unfit, is doing bad stuff. So in those events, the ruler needs to issue public edicts of self-criticism to alleviate the consequences. And not just that, actually the edict follows a prescribed period of vegetarianism and meditation for many days and self-reflection. And this has to be done with enough sincerity to change the hearts of the heaven and people. He also he was the one who convinced Emperor Wu to adopt Confucianism as the state's official ideology at the expense of all other schools of thought.
Pin, I have a question. The queen who I don't know if she was the first queen of China who created Buddha in her own image, was she part of the Han Dynasty?
She was later in the Tang Dynasty. She was actually the empress. So she was Empress Wu. Mm-hmm. She wasn't the queen, she was just directly the empress. Yeah. And so I'm gonna wrap up now. At this point, I ran out of time in my preparation, but fortunately, I think we really covered in some detail the most happening periods of Chinese philosophy. And after really the period that we covered so far, later on are just, there's not much new invention of new schools, but more of development. And actually, I should say Han Dynasty was also the beginning of, in late Han, of the religious branch of Taoism, which started as actually as local rebellions. So later developments, I'll just do a very sketchy walk through Chinese history. When the Han Dynasty fell apart, it turned into the Three States period and the Jin Dynasty and Southern and Northern dynasties. So this was an extended period for several hundred years of fragmentation, a lot of warfare, a lot of invasion by surrounding nations, a lot of turmoil. So Taoism and Buddhism gained a lot of popularity as the populace people were seeking escape from unstable political environments and constant warfare. Later, the Sui dynasty united China, but it was rather short-lived and transitioned to the Tang dynasty. So this was a great, very powerful dynasty, very cosmopolitan. And this was the golden age of Buddhism. And yeah, the question about Empress Wu, she was an empress of the Tang. Well, actually, she briefly founded her own dynasty, but that only lasted in her own lifetime. So normally we think of her as part of the Tang dynasty. And the full implementation of meritocracy via statewide testing systems for selecting government officials also happened during the Tang dynasty. And after Tang, there was another great period of fragmentation, warfare, and both integration and invasion by surrounding nations. And then the Song dynasty united China. And this was the period of the birth of Neo-Confucianism. And after the Song dynasty, there was the the Yuan dynasty, which was part of the Mongol Empire, which lasted about only 50 years in China. And then it was the Ming dynasty. Ming dynasty, generally Neo-Confucianism dominated. So oftentimes we speak in philosophical terms, we speak of Song and Ming together.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Do you have maybe perhaps a suggestion for a book that would kind of highlight some of the differences between these dynasties? Like, obviously they didn't stay in place for long. So what enabled the next dynasty to gain its power? What was different about it? Do you have a book or a suggestion I can look further into it or something? If you want to shoot me a private message, or if you know offhand now, it's totally up to you.
Yeah, I think quick suggestion, maybe you already looked at, I think Wikipedia pages are in Chinese history is pretty good, and it's a good starting point. And probably in there you will find interesting references.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll take a look and I'll do some research. Thank you.
Okay. And the final dynasty of China was the Qing dynasty. And it was, the big movement there was philology of classic texts. A lot of detailed and rather scientific comparative studies in explaining, annotating, and gaining better understanding and reconstruction of very ancient Chinese texts. And this movement was really a reaction to two things. One was the reaction of the Qing dynasty was a Manchurian founded dynasty. So they, in the earlier periods, imposed very severe punishment and oppression of intellectual writing. Anything that could possibly be suspected as expressing some kind of dissatisfaction or defiance of the Manchurian rule, you run the risk of being killed or being imprisoned. So people, the scholars just decided to go into, bury themselves in this detailed, rather scientific, studies, very detailed things instead of writing about abstract ideologies. And it's also
what is Manchurian rule?
Manchuria, the nation in Manchuria invaded and conquered China. And so the nobilities were Manchurians. And in the beginning, there were very bloody suppressions of the Han Chinese populace.
I had read in a book one time, in response to what she just said, that the Manchurians basically regarded the people who we now think of as generally Chinese, let's just say the Han, as second-class citizens, not entirely human. And they didn't want them administering their empire, maybe because they would take over the empire again. So they brought in Arab scholars and European scholars to be the administrators. And that back and forth actually was what led to the breaking up of the Dark Ages in Europe. They brought gunpowder back with them. They brought all kinds of technical knowledge and inventions from China via what we now call the Middle East and into Europe. So I think we can all thank the Manchurians for many of the things we have today.
Yeah, thank you, Madeline. I will only make one correction. Most of what you spoke of is the Mongolians, the Yuan dynasty, which was during Marco Polo was during that time. So, but some of the things you said about the Manchurians is similar. Manchurians also a very powerful, originally nomadic nation, militarily very powerful, that conquered China. And yes, for much of its rule in China, regarded the Chinese as a lower class of people, and submission to them was the number one thing. You probably are familiar of the pigtails of the traditional Chinese, but actually Han Chinese don't see it as our tradition. That was imposed by the Manchu rulers as a sign of submission by the Chinese populace. So anyway, that's a little bit of a sidebar. So it's also this movement, philological movement, was also a reaction of neo-Confucianism, that after many centuries of neo-Confucianism basically having a monopoly on Chinese thinking, official ideology, that this was a reaction to that. And later in the Qing dynasty, of course, this was, now we enter the conflicts with the West in the age of exploration and colonization by the West. So there was a lot of different schools of intellectual movement of how we respond to this Western pressure, seeking solutions to the problem of integrating or harmonizing Western and Chinese learning. Okay, at this point, I will stop talking and let's open for discussions. And maybe here, it will be more useful for you to raise your hand and I will call on folks. I see one hand, iPhone 1225 and Rubana.
I already asked my question, so at this point, I would let everyone else to ask more questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Pin.
Okay, thank you. So Rubana and then Nari. And please correct me if I mispronounce your names.
No, you pronounced it right, Payne. The Forbidden City, I know this is just from the movies. Were they built by the Song or the Qin dynasty?
They were originally built by the Ming dynasty. So the very oldest building in the Forbidden City today, I think is close to 700 years old. But later expanded and rebuilt by the Qin dynasty. So a lot of the buildings are just a few hundred years old.
So Q is pronounced as a CH in Chinese.
Yeah, very similar to a CH. So yeah. So Nari, and then
yeah, I heard you say something about the border of Afghanistan. So my question is, was that part of the, before the countries were all broken up, it was all one China, wasn't it? Mongolia and period of and Afghanistan, that area?
It's hard to speak of a set territorial boundary for China in history. As you see this map, this is Han Dynasty, right? During different periods, the territories changed, and what was under Chinese control evolved as well. So it could expand and then later shrink as the empire became weaker. So I would say, yeah, it's in a way we're applying like a modern nation state concept back in time to something that didn't really exist.
And my final question was, because you've put a lot of research into this, and I love your presentation. Was the majority of people, during all the dynasties, and I know you said there were like 50 ethnic groups now in China. Was it 50 or 50,000?
50, 50,
yeah.
officially registered or whatever, officially recognized.
So most of the people were from, were they the peasants then, you think, were the Han people, or was it Manchurians?
All over, there are many ethnicities in.
But the majority, who was the majority?
The majority are what we call Han people, but Han is really, it's not like a racial or maybe even ethnic group. It's like a cultural definition. So right now in China, more than 90% of people are identified as Han.
Okay.
And one good example is Manchurians. They used to be a very distinct group, but now Manchurians are indistinguishable from Han. They're basically, we've assimilated to become one indistinguishable identity.
What about the language?
Language, okay, so we have to separate spoken language with written language. Spoken language, there are dialects all over China. In northern China, the different dialects are roughly mutually understandable. But in southern China, they are not mutually understandable if you haven't learned the official language. For example, my father is from southeastern China, just a little bit south of Shanghai. He would tell me when he was young, you could travel to the next town, which would be only about like 10 miles away, and people could not mutually understand each other's dialect. Written language is uniform.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is unbelievable.
Yeah, this is a lot of it is due to the geography. A lot of hills, think of maybe something kind of like West Virginia, a lot of hills separating different communities. And
Well, I'm sorry, you kind of cut off.
I was saying part of it is geography. There in southeastern China, there is a lot of hills that separate communities. Think of kind of like in the US, in the West Virginia kind of regions, where the geography really kind of, encircle
But
people.
I mean, I'm just curious as to like it being so sort of close in proximity, how did they develop such drastic differences?
I'm sorry, how did they develop what?
Such drastic differences between their either ideologies. You just said sort of I think a 10-mile radius or difference between each area had such sort of different approaches or.
Well, let me clarify. The languages were very different, but the customs, culture, beliefs were not. And since the empire was large for many thousands of years, and there was these testing systems and everyone serving the central uniform government. So yeah, culturally, the variation wasn't that big. And also everyone had to speak a common kind of national language. Obviously, if you serve in the government, you have to be able to all communicate with each other and with the emperor and your superiors, and officials move all over the country. So I want to clarify, this is only a language, isolation. Also, the uniform written language is uniform across China since Qing dynasty, which was about 2,200 years ago. 2,300? Yeah.
What was the official language? Was it Mandarin or Cantonese?
The official language during the Qing dynasty was Mandarin, and today is still Mandarin. And Mandarin is a Northern Chinese, basically it's the Beijing dialect, which probably has had a lot of influence with language, from languages from the northern steppes like Manchurians. But before the Qing dynasty, the official language were probably dialects from central China.
Hey, Pin, this is Ty. Can I chime in? I had my hand up, but I'm not quite sure. First, thanks. I learned an incredible amount. The current map that you show has what appears, I think, because Chang'an as the imperial capital under the Han Empire. Is that correct? Because there's a star there. Okay,
Yeah.
so in the first map that you showed, there was a star, and the map legend suggested that was the imperial palace, but I couldn't find the star anywhere. Where it's at now seems that it was in the Qin dynasty. Is that your understanding? Because the very first map you showed, it had a map legend that denoted that the star was where the imperial capital was, and I didn't see the star anywhere. So I'm curious about that. And then secondly, go ahead.
Yeah, Qing's capital was also in the Chang'an area. So you're right. They're
okay. So all right,
in the same place.
So then then the second question is just, I'm sorry, it's just my own question, but I really want to know. Can you pronounce the author of the Three Body Problems name for me? His name is it's spelled Cixinliu.
Cixin.
Oh, sorry, that's Liu Xinci.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, actually.
Can you pronounce it for me? Say it again, please.
Liu Xinci.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, Mark, and then Powell, Madeline, and Nari.
Yeah, thanks, Pin. I enjoyed the presentation and I learned quite a bit as well.
Thank you.
Earlier in the presentation, you said that you thought Mao Zedong was, as far as ancient Chinese philosophers were concerned, was most influenced by the school of legalism. I'm wondering why you think that, and if you have like a citation or something that I can like look up to like read a little bit more about that.
Oh, I think you probably need to disregard my comment. He was interested in all, he actually was very well versed in ancient Chinese culture, philosophies, very broadly read. So I don't know. He's very complicated. He attacked Confucianism. That doesn't even mean that he didn't like Confucianism. He attacked feudalism, and I think you should do your own research and reading on that rather than be influenced by my off-the-cuff remarks.
Okay, I was just curious why you had that impression.
No less valuable.
Well, I think the reason why I said that because I know he greatly admired the first emperor of Qin. He really kind of revamped Qin. Throughout history, the first emperor was portrayed as a despot because Confucianists really dislike him. Sure. And so Mao kind of said, "Oh no, we need to reevaluate Qin for the first emperor. He did a lot of great things." So that was the origin of my comment. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, since there was such an antagonism between Mao and Confucianism in general, he had that in common with Qin Shi Huang. So that might also be another parallel. Okay,
yeah,
cool. Thank you.
And he probably was tickled that this burning of books and burying scholars alive was. So anyway, that's my personal bias. Maybe I shouldn't dig myself any deeper.
Okay,
so,
thanks, Pin.
Sure. Powell and then Madeline.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
So first of all, thank you. This was a brilliant overview. It inspired me to read more.
Thank you.
Second of all, I believe there was a question from Sarah, and I don't believe she sees the chat. So I just wanted to follow up on your question. I always try to read the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is basically online, and I linked it in the chat. I'm not quite sure if you can later see the chat history, but just very briefly, I just wanted to mention that.
Oh, thank you so much. I definitely want to do some research on my own, find some good historical books on this and on this subject matter. So I'll do that, but I'll also definitely check out both of the links that you guys recommended. I'm interested in, sort of the build up to where we're at right now in our discussion. And this is my first meetup. Unfortunately, I didn't know you guys existed until I signed up for this. So I'm looking forward to the future events.
And I just wanted to mention, it's not really a question, but you inspired me to also see how Taoism or so, how this connects to Immanuel Kant and the idea of what he referred to as the categorical imperative, and what is virtue, and can I find virtue equivalent? I believe in Chinese it's de, but I'm not quite sure if I pronounce it correctly.
Yes.
But I have a feeling I would like to find out more how 2,500 years ago, how virtue was described, and maybe this enlightenment that I am from Europe, so we had enlightenment like 150, 200 years ago, and maybe this kind of European enlightenment had taken place 3,000 years ago. I don't know. I just want to find it out. So
I have
you
read
inspired
that.
me to read more about it.
Yeah, I have read that a lot of leaders of the European Enlightenment actually favored Confucianism and were quite admirers of Confucius. So I don't know much about. I think other people in this group know much more about that. But yeah, I would encourage you, this might be the right group for you to encourage that to attend future sessions. We discuss a lot of that. Thank you.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Madeline, Rubana, and then Mark.
There we go. Okay. Thank you, Pin. This has been absolutely fantastic.
Great.
I knew you could do it. I just didn't know how you would do it.
Me either.
I'm thinking back to a couple of things. So I'm thinking back to the very first slide about the Chinese Neolithic. The thing at the very bottom that was about the, wait while you get it up. There we go. Yep, egalitarian society. Analyses of burial and residential patterns show no evidence of hierarchy. That was so interesting because the other things I had read about in various contexts in my general readings about things in life, and I had never come across that. And it was incredibly valuable to learn, both as a way that cultures refer back to an earlier golden age, sort of in not just China, but all over the world. There's sort of a golden age that took place in the past. And also as the some kind of fundamental cultural memory basis for an egalitarian society. Most egalitarian societies are hunter-gatherer, and as soon as agriculture begins, boom, you've got hierarchy, but it looks as if this kind of persisted for a while. And the main thing I wanted to say is when you mentioned that it was a practice for people who wrote philosophical tracts to attribute them to previous authors who were better known, it brought up the whole topic of originality, which is a big, huge thing here in Western civilization. Originality, creativity, personal, I don't know what in the world. And I was wondering, there's an incredible difference between the way that Western civilization looks at, say, a replica of a statue versus the way in China, a replica of a statue is just as good as the original statue, as I understand it. It's more like, or say that, I can't think of the name of it, that big, huge burial that was uncovered of all the soldiers, all the clay soldiers, the terracotta soldiers.
Terracotta soldiers. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, so the terracotta soldiers that were uncovered that had all been made, and we were all marveling that every face was unique. But it turned out that it was kind of a Mr. Potato Head approach. There were a variety of different noses that were used, and mouth types, and eyes, and cheekbones, and ears. And those got deployed in different ways to create the variety of faces. So it wasn't as if each one were individually sculpted. And I was wondering if at some point you and or Jason would think about doing a philosophy meetup talk on the topic of originality and reproduction and how it relates to Chinese philosophy, and then we can all weigh in from our various Western philosophical perspectives.
I like that idea.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. Even when I was preparing the talk, I was, the danger is the forum like that getting too political, because it makes me think of the disputes between the West and China about intellectual property, for example.
Well, maybe we could keep it historical.
Right.
Like just not go beyond the Renaissance in Europe and leave it there.
Right.
Excuse me, Madeline, you talk about the originality, you talk about the culture developed from China originally or implanted from Europe? Is that what you are talking about?
No, it's more about intellectual property, attribution of who wrote what, who authored what, who invented. That's my understanding.
In the old time?
Yeah, like in Europe, like there was a transition from the medieval era when no one signed a painting to.
Oh, okay. So then we will mention this one all the time because we should deal case by case, right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, that's I in general I against the generalize. So we can bring up the case by case, right? So we can argue Confucius is Chinese or Korean, something like this. So.
Yeah. Now I forgot your. Oh. You were talking about, yeah, the egalitarian. I also found it extremely interesting, the egalitarian, and you talk about hunter-gatherer. You know, Han Feizi, one of the chapters we studied recently with Jason, he had a passage in there I found interesting. He tried to explain why. He said the very ancient societies were egalitarian because at that time, basically it was, he didn't use those words, but it was hunter-gatherer society. The resources were abundant compared to the sparse population. And he said that's why people could get along harmoniously, egalitarian, with an egalitarian format. But as humans evolved, the population became more and more abundant. Then eventually human had to fight each other for resource, compete for resource. And that's why he's dismissive, that he's saying that it's a big mistake to try to return to those kinds of societies because it just would not work. So that's an interesting, interpretation and explanation by an ancient philosopher. Also, if you want to do more reading from an archaeological perspective, I highly recommend this book. I actually just got it recently in researching for this presentation. Yeah, it's the Chinese Neolithic. You can get it from Amazon. And this is the. Okay, so Rubana and then Mark and then Elena.
And if you go back to the map of the Han Dynasty,
yes,
it shows that Vietnam and parts of the parts of the Korean Peninsula were a part of it, right? Is that what it is?
Yes, the Korean Peninsula was probably under spheres of influence. Again, it's hard to speak of hard boundaries. Basically, Chinese empire had different degrees of integration. Generally, the further out you go, it's more of a loose integrations. But in the case of Northern Vietnam, Northern Vietnam was fully integrated as counties in the Chinese empire for about 1,000 years.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering of the influence of the Chinese philosophers on Vietnam and the Korean Peninsula.
There's pretty deep influence on Vietnam, Korea, and Japan. Okay, Rubana and, I think Rubana just spoke. Mark and Elena.
Yeah, thank you, Pin. Earlier, someone spoke about whether the Enlightenment might have happened in China in ancient times. I just wanted to make a comment about that. This is my own view, so anybody take this with a grain of salt. But there was a historian of philosophy, Karl Jaspers, I think was his name. He came up with this idea of the axial age. And what he observed was there was a very great similarity between philosophy in China, India, and ancient Greece between around 600 BC and about the turn of the millennia. And in all three areas, you had great contending many different schools of philosophy and thought. And then that declined subsequently. In Europe, everything became dominated by Christianity, in India by Hinduism, and in China by Confucianism and Taoism. And so the Enlightenment itself was, I don't think it was ancient, was really a rediscovery in a certain sense of ancient Mediterranean philosophy, particularly Aristotle and Epicurus, and was a product of a process, basically the rise of capitalism in Europe. And that only happened in the rest of the world for the most part via European colonization and influence. So I don't think it would be accurate to say that China had an enlightenment in ancient times. I think it would be accurate to say that the Enlightenment itself harkened back to that axial age and got a lot of its philosophical ideas from ancient Mediterranean. And those ideas are very similar to, in a lot of ways, to ancient Chinese and Indian ideas for that period in philosophical development. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mark, for sharing the insightful nuances. Elena.
All right. Yes, and it is a great overview of different periods. Thank you so much, Pin. Really, you have.
Thank you.
I know you put so much into it, and and you've researched it, so it's truly a great presentation.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed it.
And my question is, so going back to Confucianism, since it became so much integrated into the fabric of Chinese society and life, and even its political system, could you name anything like that became so unnoticeably coming from Confucianism, so people even don't think about it? What's the origin? But that's in reality was pretty much repeated over and over and became a part of how they live lives and how they think and how they see government and such. So just something that truly no one even thinks about, that it's Confucianism and influence of the philosophy.
Oh, yeah, I would say in general, well, I guess I can only speak for myself, and maybe my family is in every aspect of every day. Maybe others can, others grew up in Chinese or familiar with lived in Chinese societies can speak up too. So Jason, what do you say?
I mean the Chinese Confucius influence on the family?
Just everyday thinking and.
Oh, I think it's a very, just like you said, even people don't know, never read Confucius analect. The word, the saying is, you go to the wet market, the fruit peddler will still burst out the Confucius teaching. So I think that's kind of thing, it demand. Still in the today, in my age, my college friend, by arguing the political issue, still bring up Confucius idea, great unity, benevolence, okay, love people, all this kind of jargon. Okay, so that's I have to say.
Yeah, exactly. It's the common currency of behavior and virtues.
Even
and
if the
conduct.
Chinese, even if the Chinese Cultural Revolution, people don't do it, don't read it, but they still talk about it. Okay, so just don't know. That's it. So in my opinion, to understand Chinese culture, you need to start from this foundation. Otherwise, you don't understand. And Chinese people probably don't have to do it because that's in the everyday life. That's my personal thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I would say similarly for Taoism.
Yeah, same as
Yeah.
Tao. Yeah. And the egoism.
Yeah. And yeah, so great question. Okay, Mark and then Rubana.
I have a comment and then a question. So about the influence of Confucianism, I suspect the emphasis on family loyalty and tradition has a lot to do with Confucianism, and or that's a strong aspect of Confucian influence. And
Yes.
Yeah, Pin, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, yeah.
And then I
Well,
have another
the
question.
simple answer is yes. You're right.
Okay. And then the other thing, I've studied a fair number of European languages, and I've studied a little bit of Chinese. And one thing that's interesting, and I'm curious whether this is ancient or like a product of Confucianism, is that in Chinese, older and younger siblings are separate words. They're completely separate terms. Like in any all the European languages that I'm familiar with, which would be French, Spanish, English, Russian, and I think this is true in German as well. And I think it's true in all European languages. Older and younger siblings have to be distinguished by using an adjective, older or younger. They're not separate words. So brother and sister are complete categories. But in Chinese, there's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there's two types of brothers. There's younger brothers and older brothers, and there's two types of sisters. There's younger sisters and older sisters, and those are distinct categories of familial relations, like the way that we would think of an uncle is different than a cousin. So I'm wondering if anybody, Pin, you want to comment on that? Or so I believe that is also true in Hindi though as well. That in Hindi there are separate words for older and younger siblings, similar to Chinese, but that's not true in European languages. Not any that I know of, anyways.
Oh, that's interesting about Hindi. I didn't know that. But what you said about Chinese is right, and it's interesting. I sometimes I tell people about that distinction too, but it's even more than what you said. There's different nouns for uncles that are older or younger, aunts, uncles, and which side they're on, whether they're on the maternal side or paternal side. They're different words. Same with cousins. So nouns for relatives are very specific, more specific in Chinese. And I do also interpret that as embedded in our culture, the importance of family structure. But that's just a personal interpretation.
Let me have a quick response on Mark's question. I think that means Chinese culture value the seniority more than the gender. Okay, so the seniority is important. I think that's in the cultural thing. And I also know somebody told me one of African language, they don't separate older brother and older sister. So they don't separate the gender. They only have the senior sibling and the younger sibling. So so that shows the your value.
Yes.
Interesting. Thank you. I hadn't heard that. That's very interesting.
Rubana?
Okay, first I just want to say, since I'm South Asian, there are no two different words for sister or brother. It's older sister or older brother or younger sister, younger. So younger or older. But like the Chinese, every relative, whether mother's side or father's side, you just don't say uncle. The word would tell you which side, uncle or aunt. And that's all Indic languages, not just Hindi.
Oh, wow.
So what language you spoke?
I speak Bangla and I understand Hindi.
Okay.
Oh, thank you so much for for adding that.
Is with such a fantastic history of the Chinese civilization, does it bother you that so much credit is given to Mesopotamia and Babylon and that area? And it's called the cradle of civilization? It bothers me as a South Asian, like, yeah, duh.
It used to, but I guess not anymore. I become more Taoist, when things happen the way they do. So it's
Bother you?
I think when I was younger it did more, but
What about Jason?
Well, Chinese history, okay, I would say Chinese history is much easier than the European history because Chinese has only one single lineage. So European history is complex. They've, so I think Chinese history actually is much easier than European language. And another way I look at is all the Chinese history is looking from the single point of view, which I dislike. So if you take a different view, Chinese history could be totally different, but it doesn't exist in the academia. So I constantly talk about different kind of Chinese history, which is heretic. So sorry.
yeah, I guess Urbana, my answer is I try not to be upset about that. Anyway, so Madeline.
Yes, okay. Well, you all know me by now. I have to ask one question about the roots of the words, which is in the words for, let's say, uncle, the uncle on your mother's side or your uncle on your father's side. Is there a radical within those characters that has to do with a male side of the family or a female side of the family? Is it kind of a concern with matrilinearity and patrilinearity to keep track of those things using the words? Jason's laughing at me. I don't know why.
Well, that's
No,
usually they have the female side on the gender. Okay, so for example, it's if your uncle, mother's side uncle's wife, okay, then they have, about your uncle's wife, they have the girl on that. If your uncle on the mother's side of mother's brother, they have the male on that, but not necessary, but you
right.
can tell, yeah.
Oh, okay. Actually, what I meant was more along the lines of, would the words for the relatives on your father's side all contain a radical or some other element that they all had in common? And then the ones on the female side would also all contain a similar element?
No, it's been 1,000 years, so I don't see that's systematic, right? So I think you probably think about systematic way, but actually not. If I invented Chinese language today, I will make it so it's systematic, so you will fit this kind of requirement.
Okay, thanks. Thanks.
Oh, no hands up anymore. So
I know you will have overtime, so it's not possible not overtime.
I spoke too soon. Mark.
You make such a big project, I supposed to spend whole year to finish it. You do it in 2 hours. We have Mark's hands up. So.
Yeah, Mark, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Pin. Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate this conversation. I really like that question about whether the recognition that Chinese philosophy has gotten bothers you. And I'd like to say it bothers me because I think Chinese philosophy is incredibly rich and valuable. And, I'm in a lot of philosophical circles. And when I talk about Chinese philosophy, people don't take me seriously. It's like, unless you're talking about Aristotle or Plato or something like that, people don't think it's real philosophy. And,
right. I totally
it makes me mad because it is incredibly rich and valuable, and not just Chinese, but Indian as well. Indian philosophy is comparable to Greek and Chinese philosophy in its diversity and richness. And most people have no idea. They don't know about that at all. And I myself was very influenced by the I Ching when I was quite young. I got a hold of it. I was fascinated by it. It's an amazing book. It's an amazing book. And I see a lot of parallels between the Tao Te Ching and like the thought of Hegel and the development of dialectics in European philosophy. And so I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and I find this very valuable. And I think with the rise of the influence of China and the decline of the relative importance of Europe and the United States, the kind of ideological vestiges of colonialism and the kind of Eurocentric ideology is going to recede, and people are going to understand the value of ancient Chinese and Indian thought. I think it's going to become more prominent and more appreciated.
Mark, let me comment on what first the Tao Te Ching. I think I plan in 2 weeks. Next week, we are going to talk about Confucius. And the week after, I probably will talk about Tao Te Ching, select some chapter to read. Okay, so just a little bit for the next 2 weeks. Regarding like Mark, I also constantly in the Western philosophy meetup group. I fully understand what you are talking about, but I turn out to understand the problem here is in Western philosophy, we talk about the critical part, okay, no contents. We talk about the rule. And in Chinese philosophy, we talk about the contents, the substance, okay? So I think that's the difference. Another way, in Western, we talk about Lao Xiao. And in Chinese, we talk about kill, okay? Thou shalt not, okay? And in Chinese, we talk about kill part, not the thou shalt not part. So that's why two sides have problem to communicate.
Well, a lot of great comments. Yeah, Yan and then Rubana. Yan, you're muted. Yan, we still can't hear you. Okay, let's go to Rubana then.
My question is, since this is only my second time, you say it's Asian philosophy, but would you cover then all of Asia, or are we going to concentrate on Chinese philosophy and Chinese understanding? Or are you going to cover Middle Eastern and Islamic, and then Indian and maybe even Central Asian philosophers? Because there were great Central Asian philosophers in Tajikistan and all those places.
Let me answer your question, Rubana. I do want to cover the entire other side of philosophy, okay? But there's no one philosophy. Okay, so I really encourage, because if you were here, I think we also spend a lot of time talk about Buddhism, and I'm not only talk about Chinese Buddhism, a lot like that 2-3 weeks ago, basics, that's all Japanese Buddhism teaching. And then I try to go further and different than just Chinese, okay, but I do need people's support. So I also try to work with people with Indian culture to cover it. But really, if you know somebody, please let me know. I really have interest to cover the entire area because I believe they are inter-influence each other. And when I read Bhagavad Gita, I find out I know the Buddhism teach much better. So that's the way I.
So we can work on inviting speakers.
Yes, yes. Please let me know, and
including yourself.
Yeah, including yourself.
Feel free.
I'm not a scholar, but Jason, can I have your email address? Is it possible?
Oh yeah, can you send the note to my meetup page?
Okay.
And then I usually announce, and then only Pin willing to brave enough to join me.
Yeah. By the way, I'm no scholar either. I want to
Yeah,
make
we
very,
are not.
we're
And,
all
and
hobbyists.
in a way, I probably don't want scholar, right? Because you can go to YouTube to find a scholar. And interesting is sometimes I want people not Chinese to speak about Chinese history because that's in a different angle. Okay, so of course we are not going to mess up the fact, but from different angle we will understand differently. So I think that's very important. Recently, I was joining a meetup. You talk about Eastern history, okay, and the people speak is a non-Eastern and he's Jews, okay. So I think people from outside always give a different angle, and which is very valuable. So if you want to join, please let me know, and then you don't need to be expert, and you don't have to be 2 hours. You can do 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then we can, do the continuum.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be formal. Whatever you know, you can just talk to us about it. We're very
how
eager.
talkative we are, right? If we disagree, we jump up and say you are wrong. So
yeah, please. We're looking for volunteers. We're very interested in other Asian philosophies. It just Jason and I have our own limitations in knowledge, of course. So yeah, volunteers are very welcome. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yan, we couldn't get you on the sound before. Maybe it's working now?
Yeah, it's work. It should be working. How's it coming through now?
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, my PC may go out because it overheats. But anyway, I have a two-part question, and this is how the general theme is basically how the language that you learn influences your thinking. For the people who are, say that learn the Chinese language first and then learn English later, how did that change your thinking? One example could be is that in Chinese, for some people who don't know, is that the he and she, there is no he and she, it's all one sex. So a lot of times you hear non-native English speakers who learn Chinese just to get that he and she wrong when they're using that pronoun.
I used to do that, yeah.
Yeah. How long did it take you to grow out of it?
Let's see. I came when I was 12, was probably at least 20 years.
Yeah, that's about me too. About 20 years, I think. I'm guessing. All right, but how about the first part of